On May 7th, 2020, I went to work as normal. We were drilling underneath the highway. I went to the gas station, got a couple of energy drinks, came back, gave one to the driller, walked down the street to where we were drilling towards, gave my other coworker his energy drink, and I drank mine. I remember all that. After that, everything's gone because apparently I went up across the highway. I had the locator, and we were drilling underneath the highway, and so I walked across the highway and was looking for where the bit was going to be so that I could tell the driller which direction, what his depth was. And a GMC pickup hit me going 63 miles an hour. And I was thrown 72 feet, skidded along the ground, along the road. And then I don't remember anything from 20 minutes before that is what we figured out. And I don't remember anything for about 2 weeks. Even being in the hospital, I don't remember anything. So apparently what happened was my coworker, who would always mess with me about looking both ways, even on a one-way street, saw he didn't see what happened, but he saw me flying through the air after I'd been hit, and he ran over and stood in front of me and stopping the cars. Thankfully, I got thrown onto the shoulder and not in the lane. And then he called 911. So from there, the ambulance got there. Like I said, I don't remember it, but the ambulance came and I wasn't breathing. I was semi-conscious. When they went to load me onto the ambulance, I kept fighting them. And my coworker said he was watching me and could see this panic-stricken look in my eyes. And then we got into the ambulance. They had to perform an emergency tracheotomy on me because I wasn't breathing. I had so much vomit and blood collected in my throat. The ambulance took me straight to Duke Hospital, where they performed several emergency surgeries on me, including on my wrist where I had sliced an artery, on my knee where the tibia had been broken, on my ankle, on my right ankle where the tibia had been broken down there too, and they inserted a plate, and then they had to put a plate in the roof of my mouth. But before those emergency surgeries could happen, they had to prevent the swelling. So they put a drain in my skull in order to release that pressure. They said that I had a traumatic brain injury, and they said that I kept fighting them, like, constantly. I was just trying to get out of the hospital is what is the best way that I can put it. When the first thing that I remember was about 2 weeks after that incident. That happened May 7th, so the first thing that I remember was around May 21st, somewhere around there. And I'm still a little bit fuzzy from like May 21st to June 1st. June 1st, I remember almost the entire day. But until then, I'm still a little bit fuzzy. So the first thing coming to that I remember was looking down at my hands, and my left hand had this mitt on it, so that I couldn't do anything with my hand. It was one of the restraining devices. But my right hand didn't. And I thought it was the weirdest thing because, well, that's goofy. If they're trying to restrain my left hand, they should restrain my right hand because watch. And I took it off. And as soon as I pulled it off, a nurse walked in the door and said, "You got him off again?" And I told him, I was like, "Again? I only had one on. Like, what are you talking about?" But after that, I didn't have to wear mitts again. and I wasn't restrained. But they were telling me that because of how combative I had been, I was restrained. They had the mitts on and tied to the bed, and I was restrained 24/7 and highly medicated. But during those 2 weeks that I don't remember, I had a feeding tube that was going down my nose to my stomach. I had pulled out 2 of those while being restrained with my tongue. I had pulled out when I slid on the ground. I got what's called a Memorial Hermann lesion, which is a closed internal degloving on my right hip. And so because of that, the sliding, which tears away the muscle fiber and from the fascia, it started swelling. And so they had put a drain in it in order to release the swelling from there. I had pulled that drain out. I kept getting out of the restraints. I was constantly fighting. So I don't remember any of that. But what we figured out what it was is the same reason I didn't want to get on the ambulance is I was a volunteer firefighter. I didn't want to spend the money on the ambulance. When I was at the hospital, my instinct was to get back to work. I got to keep making money. I got to keep working for my family. I got bills to pay. While I was in North Carolina in Duke Hospital, I was fighting with the nurses and the ambulance drivers and the doctors. My wife was still here in Texas, which is, we were living in Huntsville, Texas. So she was still here with all 3 kids. So May 7th, I was actually supposed to be on a phone call with her to finalize some of the adoption process. So she flew out to North Carolina, and my parents flew out as well. Because of COVID-19, the hospital had certain rules set in place of no visitors. So I was out of it for those 2 weeks, and for almost the entirety of the 2 weeks, my wife and my parents were there right next to the hospital, almost sitting outside the room, but couldn't come in to see me. And which, if they had been allowed to, I believe, and they believe, that they would have been able to calm me down a lot quicker, because I was heavily medicated. I had a traumatic brain injury. I didn't know where I was. I was trying to get back to work. I didn't know who these people were. They kept coming in, sticking needles in me. I had a pick, and I ended up pulling that whole thing out. So I was really wreaking havoc during this time, and it was because I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know where I was. So because of COVID, they weren't allowed in. But on June 1st, they were able to get an air ambulance for me from Durham, North Carolina, to Hooks Airport here in North Houston, where I actually was transported to Memorial Hermann, the Woodlands, the TIRR facility, which TIRR specializes in traumatic brain injuries. So I was able to get into that program at Memorial Hermann on June 1st. And the first week I was doing great. I was going to therapy 3 times a day, just running through everything. And then the Memorial Hermann lesion on my hip started to re-swell up. And so they ended up taking me to surgery where they drained it. And they ended up draining 3 liters of blood out. And the human body only has around 8 to 9 liters. So 3 liters, quite a bit. They were able to drain that out, and they ended up putting 2 drains in to make sure that it was constantly draining. But they realized after another week or so that the drains were draining so much that there must be something inside the lesion that was still losing blood. So I went back, and they went in, and they sealed up, they cauterized those arteries that were leaking. And once they did that, both drains one drain almost immediately stopped. The other one stopped within about 3 weeks. And so they were able to remove those drains. While my wife and my parents were there with me in North Carolina, it was my our son's fourth birthday, and we couldn't, and neither his mom nor his dad could be there because his dad's in ICU and his mom's there trying to be there for me. So one of my former coworkers at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice mentioned that how awesome it would be if they did something for Gatlin, for my son. They set up a parade to go by the house where the boys were, and the parade included police cars, fire trucks, ambulances, and then a bunch of other civilians who everyone came and they stopped, and every person would give Gatlin a present, a birthday present. And the fire department even gave him the chief's hat. The official chief's hat is what they gave him. So he had a sign that said, "Daddy, I now outrank you." And he had a blast. And so that really was awesome. They really took care of Gatlin and made his birthday a whole lot better because Mommy and Daddy couldn't be with him. So one of the things that he had done when Ashley was coming up to see me was give her his little Spider-Man plush toy. And it was a Spider-Man plush toy that I had bought him at like Goodwill one time while we were hanging out. And he was always holding it, always carrying it around, loved the thing. Well, he gave it to her to give to me so that I would feel better. And I kept that with me, and then the air ambulance landed at Hooks Airport. My parents, Ashley, all three boys, my family, everybody was there. There was probably 20 people there at the airport on the tarmac waiting for me to get off. And so they unloaded me off the air ambulance, called Gatlin, and he ran over, and I handed him the Spider-Man. And Ashley said that he just started crying. It was the best thing, giving that to him. And because he knew that he had given it to me to help me get better, and now seeing me, I was better. And so he just thought that was awesome. That was the first time that anyone could see me because of COVID. That was the closest I had been to any of my family since since March, the middle of March when I went up there. That was the closest I had been to them. We got to TIRR because TIRR actually had just June 1st had just changed their policy to where they allowed one visitor per day. So my wife was able to come in and see me quite a bit. My mom was able to come in and see me quite a bit, and my dad and my little sister actually came in quite a bit. They made sure to have it set up almost on a schedule where every day I had one person come in and sit with me. My best friend Jess came in and sat with me for a day. Then being at TIRR and the people at TIRR, they really worked with me. They helped me. The challenge program, I was using a wheelchair, no weight bearing in my right leg the whole time I was there, and I had to use a wheelchair, a walker sometimes during therapy. So the therapies that they had me do were speech therapy. Because of the traumatic brain injury, they wanted to ensure that I was able to speak properly. Speech actually does a bunch of cognitive tests too. So they wanted to make sure that everything in my brain was working. Occupational therapy, just to make sure I was able to get back to work, do the things that were required of me, take a shower by myself, cook by myself. There was physical therapy, which was physically doing stuff to actually get better. We also had they had neuropsychologists that would come in and talk to me. Neuropsychologists was also making sure that cognitively I was okay. On almost every therapy, I was great cognitively. I was I was definitely above where someone would say that someone with a traumatic brain injury would be. Cognitively, I was doing above average on almost everything. So there were only quite a few things that I wasn't above average on, and they were like instant memory things. They were some tests where they asked me to listen to sets of numbers and then repeat them back to them backwards, and I wasn't able to do those very well. But my argument with that was I wouldn't have been able to do that before the accident. And so that, because I already know that the way that I learn, the way that I memorize is I have to write things down. I actually discussed that with the neuropsychologist and with the speech therapist about that. And then so on June 20th, I was able to discharge from TIRR, and my wife, my 3 kids, and I all went to live with my parents at my parents' house, which and our 2 dogs. So it's a house full. My parents also have my little sister living there, who's 21. So we moved into my parents' house because it's closer. They live closer to the hospital and closer to rehab, and that way we're not wasting all the money on gas or to get to the doctor's appointments or to therapy. So it was, and because just in case something emergent were to happen to me, I would be right there. So when I left TIRR, they had already taken 1 drain out. So of the hematoma in my right hip. So there was a second drain that they left in, and I kept draining it until it finally there was nothing. For a couple of days, it just didn't drain. I went back to the doctor, and the doctor ended up pulling it out right then. He's like, "You don't need it anymore." They did say that they would be able to put another drain in, but it risked more infection. So we decided not to get a 3rd drain put in. When I was at TIRR and the swelling in my right hip started coming back the first week of June, and they did the surgery and they removed the swelling. They realized, they came back and they realized that my hemoglobin, which is in your blood cells, then the typical levels are between 11 and 15. Mine was at a 5.5. So I was getting dizzy. When I tried to sit up, I was very tired. I was falling asleep during the day. And so they ended up having to do blood transfusions. They ended up having to give me, they did 4 transfusions, which was like 6 bags of blood. And a bag is like half a liter, so like 3 liters. They had to end up giving me like 3 liters of blood in order to get my hemoglobin back to the point. It actually only got to like 7.6 before I left the hospital, and then it fluctuated and it kept dropping, and so they kept watching it and doing different transfusions, and then finally it stabilized. Once they cauterized the arteries, it stabilized, and then it started coming up, and so then it got up to 8.6, and they were like, "You're ready to discharge," and so I was able to discharge from TIRR. When I was able to get out of the hospital, the workers' comp case managers ordered a private nurse to come in every night to check on me, to check on the drain, how the drain was doing, to check on my blood pressure, and at one point they actually took my blood to check on the hemoglobin. So that was every night. She'd come in and just try to to kind of talk to us for about 20 minutes, check everything, and then she'd go on her way. It was actually pretty cool because she was a Christian, and we started talking, and she kept calling me Miracle Man, and which is awesome because that's what my parents and family had been calling me, because it's a miracle I'm alive. I should be dead on the side of the highway. I mean, anybody that gets hit at 62 miles an hour should be gone. They shouldn't be here. And so there were definitely angels watching out for me. There, God's hand of protection was on me. So when I got to Duke, They put me under I guess an alternate name. Even though they had my driver's license and they knew my name, I guess it's hospital policy to put patients under a different name just in case there's someone trying to get them or for personal protection. So they put me under a different name. They actually put me under the name Alicia. And so when the personal nurse came in, the private nurse came in the first time, she was like, I was kind of expecting a woman because I was reading your file and it's all under Alicia, even though it says male. I thought it was just a mistake. And so she was very confused about that. When I got to the hospital and everyone started praying for me, I mean, my parents started praying for me, my wife started praying for me, my kids started praying for me. They had my immediate family all started praying for me. They spread the word, and I mean, there were probably, over 50 churches that were praying for me, if not more. Because every time, my mom or my dad would talk to somebody, they mention it, they'd be talking about it, and they'd get more people praying. And all these prayers were heard, they were answered, and even so, they were even though no one knew I was going to get hit, but God was watching out for me on the highway, and then in the hospital, with how injured I could have been, or I was. The traumatic brain injury and all that. The doctor said that I might recover fully from it and not have any problem, or I could have the mentality of a 4-year-old. They said with the traumatic brain injuries, you just don't know. And so that right there is a miracle that I still have all my function. I did all my tests. In fact, I'm probably going to go back to some school after all this, and we've been talking about it, possibly doing nursing. So all my brain function is almost there, is almost exactly the same as it was beforehand, if not better. Is a miracle. In addition to all the different people praying, they were in every continent. Just all over the place. My parents have a prayer meeting every Thursday night at their house. There's a pastor that comes to it every night, and he's from Kenya. And so he has a church. He has a church back there that they were praying for me. His church here was praying for me. There was a church in the Philippines that were praying. There was a church in Sweden and Finland and Mexico, America. There was a church in Canada that was praying for me. When I was in the hospital, the doctors kept coming in and they would say something was wrong. My aortic artery was leaking, and they were going to have to go in and do emergency surgery. And everyone started praying about it. The next day, the doctors came in and said, never mind, that it was something else. You're fine. After doing an MRI or a CT scan, the doctors kept doing that constantly. It was almost every day. This is wrong, and then we'd be praying about it. That's fine. When I had the drain, they started praying about removal of the drain, and like 6 days later, the drain had almost ceased draining, and they were able to remove it. It was just a constant miracle after miracle after miracle. And if you need proof that God is real, I'm right here. I mean, if I ever needed proof that God is real, I'm right here. There's definitely a God, and he definitely was watching over me and protecting me. Whether he did it himself or had his angels do it, that's a question that I'm going to have to ask him later. But there was definitely, there were miracles happening constantly because of prayer. I'm not really sure why he spared me, but I know that right now we're praying about it and we're listening for what he wants us to do, what he wants me and Ashley to do. One of the reasons that I believe that he spared me was because the adoption with the boys hadn't gone through yet, and to be there in the boys' lives and to be able to help raise all 3 boys and to be a mentor to them is a huge reason of why he spared me. But for other reasons of why he spared me, I'm not 100% sure, but we're still listening and praying and being receptive to what he would tell us. One of the things that I believe he spared me for was to be a light and be able to spread his word and to be a living example of his power. How many people do you know that have been hit by a truck at 63 miles an hour that are still alive? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that they're still alive, and if they are alive, they're in a vegetative state or they're in a paraplegic state. They're just, I'm up walking around. I was playing catch with the boys yesterday in the field, and it's only been 90 something days since the accident. The doctor said that the surgeries that they had to do on my knee, that I could have injured one of the nerves inside my knee and I wouldn't be able to use that leg correctly anymore. I'm walking around, and my goal is to be able to run again, to work up to playing with the boys, playing sports with the boys. So that's what my goal is, and that's what I'm going to keep working towards. So in almost every situation, especially when I got to TIRR, reading my chart, almost every doctor, every nurse that came into my room was amazed that I was coherent and talking to them and joking around with them and in the shape that I was in, because they were reading the chart and they said, we were expecting to find a patient in a vegetative state. We were expecting to find a patient non-responsive. We were expecting to find a patient in a full body cast. Even on June 20th, when I got back to the house and out of the hospital, and the private nurse read the chart, she said, I was expecting to find a patient not responsive and who couldn't talk to me and who had a traumatic brain injury and wasn't able to coherently think. And so I was able to surprise every one of them because of God, because of the miracles that he provided. Not only the miracles of me being healed, but the miracles of the doctors, the nurses that were able to work with me and know what to do. God placed those people there for a reason. So even that was a miracle. One of the biggest miracles is the fact that this happened while I was at work. Me and my buddy would go run for 4 miles, and we cross highways, we cross roads. There was a section where there weren't any trails or paths, so we'd run on the road. And I could have been hit at any time there, and all the medical bills would have been on me and my wife. But I got hit at work, and so because of that, everything was covered by workers' comp. So that right there is a miracle. And the fact that I was 10 minutes away from the hospital at Duke Hospital was a miracle. Duke Hospital is one of the top trauma hospitals in the country, and I was 10 minutes away from it. So that was a miracle.